Hi, thank you so much, Dave, for having me. Again, you are an incredible connector, and I always appreciate working with you and any of your referrals. Oops, wait, sorry. I don't know what just happened. Okay, can you see my screen? Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay, perfect. The other day I did a presentation and I got halfway through and I'm like, yeah, my email address is on the bottom of every slide. And they were like, oh, we don't have your slides. So that was embarrassing. Anyways, it's great to be here. Happy Friday, everyone. As David mentioned, we're going to be talking about some COVID updates along with some AB5 stuff, which is really fun. Because I am an attorney, I do have a disclaimer for you that content on this webinar should not be considered legal advice. It's only for informational purposes, and communications made through this webinar and are participating in it do not create an attorney-client relationship, although we are always happy to do so afterwards. And then we're not responsible for any content that you may access through third-party resources that are linked to this webinar. So today's topics, COVID-19 paid leave laws, the American Rescue Plan, some best practices for returning to work. Although I will say this, California is opening in a couple days, June 15th. So I imagine all of this will change by next week. So that's really fun. It keeps us on our toes. And then quick break, as David mentioned, and then the AB5 refresher, because we all know it went into effect last year and everybody got carried away with COVID and staying open and determining whether or not they're an essential business. And then everybody forgot about AB5, but that still went into effect. So some COVID-19 paid leave laws. This one is a big one and it came out this year, where employers are now mandated to provide employees with supplemental paid sick leave for various COVID-related absences, in addition to paid time off benefits employees receive by law or by policy, i.e. non-COVID statutory paid sick leave, vacation, anything like that. So the new statute applies retroactively, even though it didn't go into effect until March. It applied retroactively to January 1st of this year, and it's effective through September 30th. It officially went into effect March 29th. And who does this affect? Covered employers are companies with 26 or more employees. It doesn't apply if you have 25 or less employees, just 26 or more. And it allows employees to use leave to care for family members. And I want to be careful on what the term family members mean, because as of this year, that was expanded as well. Family member is now defined to include a child, a grandchild, a grandparent, a parent, a sibling, or spouse. And there's no age limit to child. So if you're 60 and you have a 30-year-old child, you can still take leave under the emergency supplemental paid sick leave law. And some qualifying reasons, there are 7 of them that we'll cover. One qualifying reason is if your employee is subject to a quarantine or isolation period related to COVID-19. Another reason is that the covered employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19. Another reason would be that the employee is attending an appointment to receive the vaccine. And it's not any vaccine, it's a COVID-19 vaccine. And then also whether or not the person is experiencing symptoms related to the COVID-19 vaccine that prevent the employee from being able to work or telework. And so a lot of people got hit hard with that second shot. And so you were able to take this emergency supplemental paid sick leave if your business has 26 or more employees, essentially. So a couple other qualifying reasons that I think are important to mention under the emergency supplemental paid sick leave is that the covered employees experiencing symptoms related to COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis, that the covered employee is caring for a family member, and we all know now that family member has been greatly expanded. If that person is caring for a family member who is subject to an order or guidelines, or who has been advised to self-quarantine or isolate. And then lastly, that the covered employee is caring for a child whose school or place of care is closed or otherwise unavailable for reasons related to COVID-19 on the premises. And also, I'm happy to take questions throughout. I like questions that where we're on a topic. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself and just interrupt, or you can send it through chat, whatever is easiest. Okay. So the process for determining the amount of leave employees receive under this law is pretty similar to that of last year's 2020 law. The leave amount also represents how much leave employees can use through September 30th, 2021. So specifically for full-time employees receive 80 hours if either their employer considers them to work full-time, or on average, they worked or were scheduled to work at least 40 hours per week in the 2 prior weeks from the date they took that leave. For your non-full-time employees, it's employees with a normal weekly schedule. They receive the total number of hours they are normally scheduled to work over 2 weeks. And then we also have something called the variable schedule. And this is for employees who work a variable number of hours, whose tenure is more than 6 months. So they've had to have been with the company for more than 6 months prior to taking the leave. And they receive 14 times the average number of hours they work each day in the 6 months prior to their leave. If they only work between 15 days and 6 months, use the same calculation, but over the entire period of employment. Employees who work 2 weeks or 14 days or fewer receive less hours equal to the total number of hours worked. So if you have variable schedules, there's some mathematical calculations involved. You can ask me, but I'm not a mathematician. I would probably consult somebody who's good at math. Okay, so the amount of paid leave employees, already received in 2021 before the law took effect might qualify as an offset that wholly or partially satisfies an employer's supplemental paid sick leave obligations. So under the law, if an employer pays an employee another benefit for leave taken on or after January 1st of this year that is payable for the law's covered reasons and compensates employees in an amount equal to or greater than the amount of pay that the law requires, and I'll discuss that a little bit further below or in a minute, an employer may count those hours towards the number of hours of supplemental paid sick leave that it must actually provide that employee. However, this is a supplemental benefit, right? So employers cannot count paid sick leave employers used under the California's Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act, the pre-COVID paid sick leave and safe time law, or the 2020 supplemental paid sick leave. So employers can use it as an offset paid leave they provided per federal or local law in effect, or that has become effective on or after January 1st, if that leave was provided to an employee for any of California law's covered reasons. Interaction with other paid sick leave. This has been a common question this year. It must be in addition to any paid sick leave that's already available to the employee. Of course, California has mandatory sick leave. And you may not require use of other paid or unpaid leave, paid time off, or vacation time before COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave. And then as an employer, you may require your employees to first exhaust their COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave prior to using Cal OSHA's paid sick leave. So keep that in mind. To determine the hourly pay for this paid sick leave, the calculation this year is a little different from last year, which required employers to pay at the employee's regular rate of the last pay period, the state minimum wage or local minimum wage, whichever is the highest. However, under the 2021 law for non-exempt employees, there are 2 calculation formulas to complete before determining the rate of pay. And if anybody needs this written out, I'm happy to share my slides. But the first pay rate calculation uses the employee's regular rate of pay, regardless of whether an employee works overtime in the work week they use the leave. The second calculation requires the employer to divide the employee's total wages, excluding overtime, by their total hours worked in a full pay period of the prior 90 days of employment. And then keep in mind, though, that if the applicable state or local minimum wage is greater than either calculation, employers have to use that amount for the supplemental paid sick leave rate. It's basically the highest of approach, and this differs from last year's calculation. And then for exempt employees, employers have to calculate it in the same manner you calculate wages for other forms of paid leave. And the law doesn't define exempt under the 2021 law. An exempt definition is included in the state's pre-COVID paid leave and safe time law. So under that law, the state labor department said basically that employees are only exempt if they are executive, administrative, or professional employees. Whether exempt or otherwise, employers need to pay more, need not pay more than $511 for each day, or more than $5,110 overall. A provision unique to this law, as opposed to last law, allows employees who max out because of the pay caps to use other available paid leave to top up so that they're fully compensated during this absence. And then employers must have provided an accounting to employees. So this basically went into effect March 29th, and I had a lot of companies have to scramble because they often pay their employees on the last day of the month, right? Like the 15th and the last day of the month. So on the paycheck stubs, you need to set forth the amount of COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave available on the employee's itemized wage statement or any other writing provided on payday. For variable schedules, for employees who work variable schedules, employers must conduct initial calculations of COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave and then indicate the word variable next to the calculation. And that has to be updated when the employee requests leave or any records under the labor code. And then you need to update your itemized wage statements, which is basically your paycheck stubs, and provide new information to employees immediately if it was not done. And this should have been done by March 29th. So hopefully you're on good terms with your payroll company and they're keeping you up to date on what you need to do to be compliant. And then because California likes to make things so easy on employers, this applied retroactively, right? So you have to go back to January 1st of 2021. And so if an employee has taken a qualifying leave since January 1st, which was not paid for by the employer must pay for the leave upon the employee's request. And so if, for instance, you had someone get the vaccine early on, let's say in February, and you didn't pay them for taking that time off of work in order to get that vaccine, and they request it, you have to pay them now. And it must be paid on or before the payday for the next full pay period after the request is made. And it must reflect this payment on the paycheck stub, the itemized wage statement, or other writing on designated pay day. So a lot to keep in mind with this, which is why I have so many slides on this. The California Department of Industrial Relations has made a model poster publicly available. If you need the link, email me. My email address is at the bottom of every slide, which I hope you guys can see. And employers must conspicuously display this in their workplaces. Of course, if you have employees working remotely or in the field, then you can distribute the poster electronically. We recommended doing this one of two ways, or both ways, I guess. One, send it out via email, and then two, put it in a folder that is accessible to all your employees. And then California requires information concerning supplemental paid sick leave be available on your paycheck stubs or any other written notice employees receive on payday. And then one last thing that is regarding obligations before we get into the American Rescue Plan Act. Employees alone determine how many supplemental paid sick leave hours they need to use. So similarly, to Other sick leave, employees get to choose whether they will use supplemental paid sick leave or some other paid or unpaid leave benefit that their employer provides or the law requires to cover an absence. Employees can use this 2021 supplemental paid sick leave immediately when the law takes effect if they make an oral or written request to use the leave. So just like last year's 2020 predecessor, the 2021 law does not contain language allowing employers to ask employees to provide verification or documentation to substantiate their need for leave. Assuming that the State Department does not change its position from last year, employers might only be able to ask for reasonable supporting verification or documentation if they have evidence that an employee is abusing their entitlement to leave. And remember, that can get a little bit tricky because you want to have an objective reason for asking for evidence, not just I'm going to target, specific individuals or specific genders or anything like that. Although I will say this, we had one client who had an employee come to them and say, I'm getting the COVID vaccine, I need to be out. And then they found out on Facebook that she was in Mexico for the weekend. So if that's the case, you can certainly ask for documentation. Okay, just wanted to touch a few slides on the American Rescue Plan Act. This is, employers with 500 or less employees, you have the opportunity to take advantage of some tax credits for employee leave taken in the first 2 quarters of this year for reasons related to COVID-19. And then, of course, you need to update your policies accordingly. In the last year as an employment attorney, we've been very, very busy updating policies for everybody and making sure everything's compliant. So the FFCRA tax credits continue to be available for covered employers who provided paid leave to employees through the first quarter of 2021. However, ARPA also provides employers with the opportunity to obtain tax credits for offering an additional 10 days worth of the supplemental sick leave to eligible employees during the second and third quarters of this year. So April 1st through September 30th. And then additionally, ARPA expanded the coverage of the type of sick leave that qualifies for the tax credit. So in addition to the other qualifying reasons for taking paid sick leave under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, ARPA makes the tax credit available if the employee is taking paid leave in connection with obtaining immunization related to COVID-19 or recovering from any injury, disability, illness, or condition related to such immunization. ARPA also provides a tax credit for up to an additional 12 weeks of partially paid leave under FFCRA's Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, with a significant expansion of qualifying reasons as well. Under FFCRA, this Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act was available only in connection with an employee's inability to work or telework due to a COVID-19 related closure of a child's school or place of care. ARPA expands the list of qualifying reasons so that they are coextensive with the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. And then what's more, lastly, ARPA eliminates the FFCRA's initial 2-week period of unpaid leave. And this gets really complicated, so I'm not going to get into the details, but basically the maximum amount of tax credit available to an employer under the provisions of ARPA has been increased from $10,000 to $12,000. ARPA adds qualifying reasons to take paid sick leave for, it's very similar to what we talked about. The employee is obtaining the COVID-19 vaccination, recovering from the vaccination, or waiting or seeking a diagnosis after an exposure. And then ARPA adds non-discrimination and anti-retaliation provisions, which prevent employers from basically cherry picking which of the qualifying reasons under FFCRA it wishes to recognize or to which employees it wishes to extend. It basically takes an all or nothing approach. You can't just have this apply for certain individuals in your company. And last year, when things were starting to get pretty crazy in March, we had one of our clients decide to send home everybody over the age of 60 because they were nervous that they were, a class of individuals who might be more susceptible to COVID. And in doing so, they kind of asked for an age discrimination lawsuit. So you want to be careful that any of your statutes or policies or anything you implement within your business are non-discriminatory, right? By sending everybody home over the age of 60, that's age discrimination. So keep that in mind. And then of course, if you do discriminate, no credit's available for you, right? So even if you say, oh, I only want to give it to my highly compensated employees or only my full-time employees, that would be discriminatory, and then you are not able to take advantage of this as a business. So ARPA added, $7.25 billion to the PPP program, which I think is great for small businesses. The previous deadline to apply for PPP was March 31st. That was, of course, extended until May 31st. And then ARPA has some additional benefits as well, like the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. And so if you qualify for that, look into it. ARPA also extended unemployment benefits. It's the $300 per week through September 6th. It talks about the pandemic emergency unemployment and pandemic unemployment assistance benefits. Those were both extended until September 6th as well. And then limited exclusion of unemployment benefits from federal income tax. I think that's the ARPA permitted, an individual or each spouse to exclude $10,200 in unemployment benefits from federal income tax as long as the household income was under $150,000. So if both spouses received unemployment compensation and their total household incomes under $150,000, they were able to exclude $20,400 from their federal income tax return. And then just some things that I thought were interesting that were not included in ARPA: no increase to federal minimum wage. The current federal minimum wage, I should ask this as a pop quiz if you want, put it in the chat. But does anyone know the minimum federal minimum wage? The minimum federal minimum wage, the federal minimum wage. It is $7.25 per hour. Of course, many states and local jurisdictions have increased that, but that is the current federal minimum wage. And President Biden's bill under ARPA did not include that. And then there's no elimination of tip credit, and then no paid leave entitlement. So there's that. And then just some best practices to returning to work. Before I get into that, I just want to make sure everybody kind of understands the differences between layoffs and furloughs. A layoff can be temporary or permanent. A furlough involves reducing the days or weeks that an employee may work. And I will say this, under the labor commissioner, they said for purposes of timing a final paycheck, a layoff and furlough are the same. So both a furlough and a layoff, assuming eligibility requirements are met, they would entitle the employee to receive unemployment benefits. So just some furlough issues that we see, with non-exempt employees, it's pretty easy. You can schedule them for fewer days or fewer hours without liability concerns, unless reporting time pay applies. But if they don't work, you don't have to pay them. For your exempt employees, that is more complicated. And I saw a lot of businesses getting into trouble with this last year because they took an employee who, let's say, is making $80,000 a year, qualified as an exempt employee. They meet the duties test, they meet the minimum salary threshold test, and then they decided to cut that employee's hours from 40 hours a week to 20 hours a week. And in doing so, cut their salary from $80,000 a year to $40,000 a year. Well, when doing that, that person now falls below that minimum salary threshold, right? And so they become a non-exempt employee. It's that transfer from an exempt employee to a non-exempt employee. And then, of course, as a non-exempt employee, you're entitled to overtime, entitled to breaks and lunches and keeping track of those things. So just be mindful that reducing an exempt employee's salary may bring them below the necessary salary for the exempt status. And then of course, they may be reclassified as a non-exempt employee as a result. Additionally, a furlough longer than 10 days or one pay period, whichever is shorter, then triggers an employer's obligations under the final pay regulations, and that employee is considered terminated. Also, just a quick note here, I hope everyone is done with furloughs and layoffs, but if you are still going through them, check your benefits policies to determine if you can still provide benefits to your furloughed employees. And then termination obligations apply regardless of whether it's involuntary, voluntary, a layoff, or a furlough. Obligations as an employer include providing a notice to the employee as to the change in relationship. That's a specific form. You have to have specific things on that form. You have to provide unemployment benefits information, which is Form 2320. You want to provide the final paycheck on the last day of work, of course, and it has to include all accrued vacation time, business expenses to date. Paid sick leave is not considered a wage, so it's not paid out upon termination, so it's not like you would have to pay your employees out under the Supplemental Paid Sick Leave Act or anything like that. You want to provide COBRA notices and then the health insurance premium notice. Ensure that you document the reason for termination. There's been a lot of confusion during the pandemic regarding the difference in meanings between terms like layoffs and furloughs and termination. So do not rely on that term to explain the reason for the termination. Make sure to also document it if it is performance-based or due to lack of work or anything like that, because EDD is going to ask you. Okay, now to get into the vaccines, big question we've gotten is whether or not as a business owner, you should mandate or just recommend that your employees get the vaccine. And you really want to make sure your decision is an informed one. We're going to be covering a lot of what it entails. And you want to consider logistical considerations, right? Even if it is available to your workforce, is there a way to distribute it or administer it?
We want people to have a better understanding of the people, the creatives, the mechanisms behind.
I'm sorry, was that a question or was that just somebody unmuted? Okay, you guys are doing other things during my presentation. I'll try and dance or do something more entertaining. Okay, so another thing to consider really is what's happening in your community. Are schools open for in-person learning now? I hope most are. Do most of your employees use public transportation? Are you hearing a lot of pushback from your employees on the issue of vaccines? And then, of course, keep in mind any legal and employee relation issues impacting each employee or group of employees. And so I'm going to focus a little bit about starting with EEOC's guidance that was issued last year and whether employers can require vaccinations. And it turns out that they can. Surprise, surprise. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing updated its guidance just in March, and it confirmed that employers can mandate that employees receive an FDA-approved vaccination without violating FEHA, so long as the employer reasonably accommodates employees' disabilities and sincerely held religious beliefs. You're going to be hearing a lot about those two things over the next few slides. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing also confirmed that employers must engage in the interactive process with your employees who have a disability or sincerely held religious belief not to be vaccinated. They also emphasized that employers must determine the availability of a reasonable accommodation on a case-by-case basis. So, and working from home can certainly be a reasonable accommodation for a disability. And they suggest that employers and employees consider reasonable safeguards and procedures that employers might be able to put into place so that employees could work at their work sites without endangering themselves, other employees, or third parties. Now, excuse me, FEHA does not require employers to reasonably accommodate employees who just decide that they are refusing to be vaccinated for reasons that do not relate to a disability or sincerely held religious belief. So if you have somebody on your team who doesn't trust that the vaccine is safe and is refusing to get vaccinated, or is an anti-vaxxer and doesn't do any vaccines, those do not qualify as either a sincerely held religious belief or a disability. And then the guidance goes on to say that employers may discipline employees who refuse to be vaccinated as long as the discipline is not retaliatory. For example, employers may not discipline an employee for requesting a reasonable accommodation related to a disability or sincerely held religious belief. And then they reiterate that employers may not retaliate against an employee who claims that the employer's vaccination policy intentionally discriminates on the basis of race, national origin, or another protected group. The FAQs also provide that employers may discipline employees who refuse to be vaccinated, right? But you want to be careful there, right? Basically, just because somebody's refusing to get vaccinated doesn't mean you can necessarily fire them. Employers that administer their own vaccination policies or programs can ask questions that elicit information about a disability. And if the employer asks such questions, those questions really need to be job related and consistent with a business necessity. So for example, if an employee objects to being vaccinated, the employer could ask whether the employee's decision is based on the need for accommodation related to a disability or some other reason. So that is the proper response when somebody refuses to get vaccinated or says, I'm not getting vaccinated. Also, you can require proof of the vaccination. However, you must maintain that information as a confidential medical record. And I have had clients, I have known of companies this year that have said, if you show me a fully vaccinated card, I'll give you $100. And that's fine, but you have to be careful not to discriminate against anybody who isn't able to show that card because of a disability or a sincerely held religious belief or practice. And then just to go over a little bit of the EEOC's position on vaccinations. It's not a medical examination under the ADA. The vaccination does not have to be job related or consistent with a business necessity. We'll get into what a direct threat is a little bit later on, but it doesn't have to do with the business. You can mandate the vaccine and request proof of the vaccination. And then you can, as an employee, request to be excused based on a disability or medical reason or sincerely held religious belief or practice. And then for voluntary vaccinations, basically there's two things, choosing whether or not to be vaccinated and responding to pre-screening questions. In dealing with either voluntary choice, the important takeaway is for employers not to discriminate or retaliate against employees who decline to participate. So you want to avoid claims of hostile work environment. And so as an employer, you need to be very cautious about keeping information about participation or lack of participation in the program confidential. You can't have employees harass, non-vaccinated employees for failure to get vaccinated or vice versa. For mandatory vaccinations, you can mandate this, right? They are permissible, but you still have to do the process and care must be taken to anyone who is not getting vaccinated. So you can't just automatically exclude anyone who refuses to get vaccinated from your workforce. Basically, the ADA allows an employer to have a qualification standard that includes that an individual shall not pose a direct threat to the health or safety of individuals in the workplace. However, if a safety qualification like a vaccination requirement screens out or tends to screen out individuals with disabilities, you as the employer have the burden to show that an unvaccinated employee poses a direct threat due to a significant risk of substantial harm to the health and safety of others. And you really need to do an individualized assessment. There's a 4-step inquiry that an employer has to do, basically duration of the risk, nature and severity of the potential harm, the likelihood that the harm will occur, and the imminence of potential harm. So for example, if you have employees who were working on site during the entire pandemic, the direct threat standard will probably be pretty hard to meet unless you have specific extenuating circumstances. And then if you determine that an individual who cannot be vaccinated poses a direct threat, then you can't exclude that person from the worksite or take any other action unless there's no way to provide a reasonable accommodation absent undue hardship. That would then eliminate or reduce the risk so that the unvaccinated employee does not pose a direct threat. And then if there's no reasonable accommodation that exists that would eliminate or reduce the risk, the employer has to determine if there are any other leaves, rights, or policies that would apply. For example, having the person work remotely, FFCRA leave, FMLA or CFRA leave, or other employer paid or unpaid leave options. So if an employee cannot get vaccinated because of a disability and there's no reasonable accommodation, you could exclude that person from the workplace, but that doesn't mean you should automatically terminate someone. In fact, the EEOC cautions against this, where the employer should consult with legal counsel to determine if any other rights apply. So it can be a minefield for businesses. And then just similarly, if the employee indicates that they're unable to receive a vaccination because of a sincerely held religious belief or practice, care must be taken before just excluding that person from the workplace. It's a bit different than a disability, but you need to take the request just as seriously. And the definition of religion is broad, right? And so the burden here is so low to establish undue hardship when dealing with a religious accommodation. You basically have to use the same approach to reasonable accommodations through the interactive process. The EEOC has used identical language between ADA and religious issues in stating that if no reasonable accommodation exists, it's lawful to exclude that person from the workplace, but they qualify it as you would do exactly with ADA, stating that you cannot automatically terminate that person and you have to engage in the interactive process. And then there are privacy-related concerns. So even though the EEOC does not consider a vaccine a medical examination, California still has the California's Confidentiality of Medical Information Act, which requires employers to protect the privacy and security of any medical information they receive. And this would include information collected and disclosed in relation to the employer vaccination program. We've read a bunch of surveys about whether or not you should mandate this or just simply encourage it. And the surveys we've read stated that employees are less likely to want to get vaccinated if it's mandated, right? If I tell you you have to do something, you're less likely to want to do it. So engage with your employees, focus on the facts, consider any obstacles, and talk to them about the importance behind it. And it is 10:40, and before we get into AB5 refreshers, I think David wanted to take a quick break. Is that right?
Yeah, just first and foremost, maybe any questions that anybody has specific to the COVID protocols and things that you've mentioned today. So if anybody has any questions on Cynthia on this topic before we kind of pivot on, this might be the perfect time for this.
David, I see a few questions in the chat. I'm happy to read them and answer them.
Yeah, please go ahead if you'd like, Cynthia.
Okay, perfect. So somebody asked, how could an employer possibly distinguish an employee as having a sincere religious objection versus being an anti-vaxxer, which you said doesn't qualify? That is a really good question. Are an employee's social media posts going to be considered credible evidence that an employee doesn't fall under the sincerely held religious belief? So an anti-vaxxer is not a sincerely held religious belief, right? So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, Kevin, my religious belief does not allow me to get vaccinated, you kind of have to take that person's word for it. It's not like the burden is so low to show that somebody has a religious belief, all it takes is a written statement. I believe in this and I'm not going to get vaccinated because of that belief. If you have somebody just out there like what you're saying on social media, which you also need to be careful about what you're taking from social media, because if their social media is private, that could become another issue. If they're out there just writing blog articles and saying I'm an anti-vaxxer, yes, that would qualify. And then you could exclude somebody from the workplace and possibly even terminate them if that's the reason behind it. But you still need to make sure that nothing else applies that would protect that individual. So it's a process to go through. And then somebody else asked, if an employer mandates or coerces an employee to either get or not get one of the COVID vaccines issued under the emergency use authorization, and something goes wrong, is the employer potentially liable to being sued? Does the employer have any legal immunity? So I think that it's, so if an employer mandates it, to get, let's say an employer mandates to get the vaccine and something goes wrong in getting the vaccine, then yes, it could become a workers' comp issue, which we saw last year when the law changed in July, or through July, that said everybody who gets COVID at your work is essentially shown to have gotten COVID from the workplace. And if you want to prove otherwise, the burden is on the employer to show that they got it from home or from another source, not from work. And I think that's going to be the same approach with regard to the vaccines. If somebody gets sick or has a bad reaction, and you as the employer is mandating everybody get the vaccine, or if you had a truck come and have everybody get vaccines at that point, then you would be liable and it would be under a workers' comp case. And does the employer have legal immunity? When does California give you any legal immunity? I doubt that. I think you would just turn it into a workers' comp company and they would deal with it. And then the last thing is, if a public anti-vaxxer declares in addition a religious belief, it sounds like they can't be required to get the vaccine. Yes, you're right. So thank you guys. I'm so glad a few of you are listening. This is great. I love the interaction.
Great, thanks for that, Cynthia. We probably got about, right about 15 minutes or so for you to kind of brush us up on the AB5 stuff. Is this a good time to pivot there?
Perfect. Love it. Yes.
Great.
So AB5, you know, I thought last year was going to be all about AB5, as I mentioned earlier. And then of course, COVID hit and we had to shut down most everything, and businesses had to see, someone who one more question just came in. I know someone who manages a housing community for seniors and they have a clubhouse. In order to open, do they have to hire somebody to clean and wipe down areas through the day as people visit the common areas? Yeah, I would say that you want to continue doing your COVID protocols in senior community housing. So wiping down things, wearing masks still, everything like that. So even though California is starting to open more and more over, you know, in the next 4 days, hopefully, if all goes well, you still want to keep in sanitation and COVID related protocols in place following your plan. So back to AB5, every business, you know, got sidetracked last year, but AB5, let's remember, still went into effect, right? And so California law is just known to be one of the most rigorous in the country in terms of labor laws. While both federal and state law apply to California employees, I'm going to focus obviously on California law and AB5. And I have a lot of clients with employees in multiple states. I really recommend that if you have employees in multiple states, you also find local counsel there because the rules are different. Although if you're following California for all of your employees, you're probably okay. But how I see a lot of businesses, before I get into this, next slide, how I see a lot of businesses getting hit is that they're a Pennsylvania-based company and they decide to hire one person in California as an independent contractor for graphic design. And then they get hit with a misclassification lawsuit. They get hit from EDD. They get hit from the labor commissioner. California has 6 ways to get sued in California, you know, here. So, okay, independent contractor versus employee, right? Calling somebody an independent contractor does not make them an independent contractor, even if they want to be an independent contractor, right? These terms are defined by law. You cannot circumvent them, even if both of you agree that you want an independent contractor relationship. In fact, my little antenna goes up, or a red flag goes up, when I see somebody who comes to a business and says, I want to be an independent contractor. Oftentimes that person has sued the last 3 places that they worked as an independent contractor. It happens all the time. And it's really not a matter of if you're going to get hit by something, right? By the relationship going sour with that person, with EDD doing an audit. It's a matter of when. And there's been a lot of major developments with independent contractors over the last few years. Obviously, it all stemmed from the 2018 California Supreme Court decision, Dynamex, and then California thought that they're owed $7.1 billion in unpaid taxes. So then they put into effect AB5, and Dynamex is where that ABC test came to distinguish employees versus independent contractors. So AB5, what it does is it presumes that everybody who works for you is an employee, unless you satisfy ABC of this test, right? You cannot default to independent contractor. The default is an employee. And part B of the test is where everybody was having issues, right? That the person performs work that is outside the usual course of the hirer's business. And then of course, part A, free from control and direction of the hirer in connection with the work, very common, long time thing. And then C, customarily engages in the trade involved in the work performed. So while Dynamex only applied to the Industrial Welfare Commission wage orders governing minimum wage, overtime, and meal and rest breaks, AB5 expanded the ABC test to cover the entire labor code and unemployment insurance code. And then they thought they'd come up with exceptions, right? So certain exemptions are professionals, and professional services contracts are exempt from the ABC test, but then you still have to look at the original test, which was Borrello. And to fall under this exemption as a professional, there are, I don't know, like 10 things you have to do, right? That they maintain a business location, which could be that person's individual residence, but that business location has to be separate and apart from the hiring entity. That they have a business license and any required professional license. That they set their own rates and negotiate their own rates for the work performed, that they set their own hours outside of the project completion dates and reasonable business hours, that they customarily perform the same type of work under contract with other entities, and they hold themselves out to other potential customers as available to perform the same type of work, and then that they customarily and regularly exercise discretion and independent judgment in performing those services. Now, I had a lighting company come to us a few years ago, and they said that this particular person had a website, and they were like one of 2 independent contractors that the company had worked with them. And they said that even though their company does lights, this was very specific in the types of lights, and a lot of design and care went into it, and they were very highly specialized lights. And the person came to them with an independent contractor agreement. They came to them with their own website, all of these things. And then guess what? A year and a half later, after working with this company, they get sued for misclassification. And it's interesting because that website disappeared. And so if you are working with independent contractors, make sure you just do a couple of screenshots, right, with of that person's website. And then I do see a question about 2 corporations, and I'm going to get into that. That's the business to business exemption. So I will get into that in a little bit later of a slide, but these are the types of professionals. I won't go into details. Music industry and performer exemptions. This was good for a couple of musician friends of mine. And then there are some miscellaneous exemptions, which may or may not apply to you if you fall under there. There are specific exempt occupations, insurance, doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers. Those people all, well, lawyers, architects, and engineers all hold active licenses with the state of California. And so there are those exempt occupations. And then after the election last year in November, the day after the election, I got so many calls saying, yes, Prop 22 passed, let's celebrate. And I got calls from all sorts of clients, big and small. And it's important to note that Prop 22 is only for an app-based driver, right? They are an independent contractor if certain conditions are met. And there's like a few of them, you know, that the company does not control the dates and times that the driver works, that the company doesn't require the driver to accept any specific rideshare services or delivery services, that the company doesn't restrict the driver from working in different companies during the engaged time, that sort of thing. So basically with Prop 22, it's important to note that it has no impact on other industries other than app-based rideshare and delivery platform workers. So, but you know, I will say this, given its positive reception by a lot of voters, I think that there may be additional industries that will follow in Uber and Lyft's footsteps to seek their own exemptions. But also remember, this is your industry the type to spend $180 million lobbying against AB5 because Uber and Lyft had that kind of money. This is going to a question about AB5 between two corporations. That is the bona fide business-to-business contracting relationship. And you have to satisfy 12 criteria in order for this to work. And these are the 12 criteria. I won't go over all of them, but I think the important ones that the contract's in writing, you have to have a contract in writing. I had a lawyer call me on Wednesday night and he's like, I have this paralegal. She's worked for me for years. I have her as an independent contractor. I'm like, well, okay. Does she have a contract with you? Well, no. Okay, well, that's going to be a problem. That they have a business license, a separate business location, you know, they contract with others, set their own rates, all of those types of things. And then I also see a comment in here, old websites can always be found on the Wayback Machine. Oh, that's good to know, archive.org. That's good to know, thanks. That's really good to know. Oh, that's interesting. I'll keep that in mind for future clients who have issues. So, okay, even if you get to the business-to-business contracting exemption and you satisfy all of this, right, all 12 criteria, you still have to apply Borrello, right? And one of the most important factors is that the requirement that the service provider only provides services directly to the contracting entity, not to their customers. And that just provides a whole host of issues. So for example, with staffing and temp agencies in particular, they're going to want to consult counsel with regard to that. Some big concerns, you know, with the business-to-business exemption is that as a whole, it is its potential effect on the joint employer status, whether one independent business's employees or workers could be considered that of an independent business if it fails to satisfy any of the 12 criteria. And I will say this, I've seen it where yeah, free from control is a very fuzzy phrase, absolutely. But I have seen it to where I had somebody get sued. They decided not to do anything about it. And, you know, 6 months later, they get a default judgment against them for $1 million. And what was interesting about that case, we were not able to help them. But what I'll never forget about that case is that an individual independent contractor sued 10 companies, 10. And it was basically the company that they worked with directly and 9 of the companies that it remotely touched while working for that main company. And the ones who did not stick their head in the sand, the ones who took care of it actually got themselves out of the case, right? They worked for that other company, like there's no relationship here. I don't even know who this person is. But the person who contacted me 6 months prior, they already had a default judgment against them and they were getting their bank account levied. well, they chose not to do anything about it. And even though we could have done something way beforehand, by then it's a little too late. So you need an appellate lawyer at that point. But yeah, something to keep in mind there. I have seen where a person sues every company that's ever touched within the company that they actually worked for. And then there's this single engagement business to business exemption, which I also think is important because we deal with a lot of people in the entertainment industry, you know, one-time hire models or music producers or things like that. And if it's basically a single engagement event, the ABC test does not apply. So that's good news. Yes, I have a few minutes left. I'm trying to get through everything. It doesn't apply to contractor and subcontractor relationships in the construction industry, which I think is great. That should be a given. Here's the criteria for that. Referral agencies, if you want to rework your entire business as a referral agency, there's a lot of steps you have to do in order to qualify as that. Happy to talk you through it. The Borrello test really comes back to the right to control the manner and means of performing the work. And yes, that's a very fuzzy phase. The Borrello factors, in case you don't know them, and Borrello has been around for a long time, these are the factors you want to look at. And remember, with the Borrello, it's not that you have to meet each and every factor. It's that weigh the different factors between and see what has more weight. Best practices, just assume everyone is an employee. That is the best practice. If you want otherwise, make sure that all your legal requirements are met and that you get a legal opinion. When hiring an independent contractor, properly report it to EDD. You know, failure to do so can cost you significant fines. And then really, no matter who your employment attorney is, do at least 2 check-ins with them per year. Make sure they have an experienced team of attorneys behind them. Everybody who works at my firm has 10 to 20 years of legal experience. My paralegals are at 30. We happen to be an all-women firm with a male assistant. And then also do an early liability assessment, right? Like if you think that somebody could potentially sue you, or you think that there might be a gap in some of your policies or procedures, have somebody go through it, whether it's me or anybody else, just so you know what's at stake. And then if you do get sued, do a liability analysis to see how much is at stake, right? Is it $5,000? Is it $50,000? Is it $500,000? And I'd love to keep in touch with everybody. My email address and phone number, we're located in Pasadena. And if you have any questions, I think we have 1 minute. I have one question through the chat. If AB5 applies to a business to business, does it require that the person be taken off the payroll of one company, losing benefits, longevity, and so forth, and put on the payroll of the hiring company? So the best way to protect yourself in a business to business exemption is that the hiring business is paying payroll on them. That's basically what California wants to know. Is somebody paying payroll on them? And if so, great. Yes, they are. But I don't understand by being taken off payroll, because under it, as an independent contractor, they should never be on payroll to begin with. So you want to be careful of that. You want to make sure that that person is submitting an invoice to you on their letterhead and you're paying it. And then what about sole proprietor to independent sole proprietor relationship, having another person do hourly work for you as extra hands? So if it's a sole proprietor hiring another sole proprietor, you still have to meet everything. Even if it's just hourly work, they would be considered a part-time employee, right? Even if they run their own business. If it is a sole proprietor and another sole proprietor, hopefully that sole proprietor has payroll set up, and so that somebody is taking payroll taxes out of it. As a sole proprietor, you can of course have your payroll set up, but really that person might have to be an hourly employee, just part-time. Are babysitters employees even if hired from an app or service? So what's interesting about babysitters is care.com, which is something I use and I found my nanny through. Care.com specifically says you need to do a legal analysis on behalf of this. If you have somebody come in every single day or regularly, I have a lot of resources on nannies because I hired one. If it really is just a one-time date night thing or really infrequently, you're fine as a babysitter. But do be careful if you have somebody coming regularly. Like if every Thursday is date night, you may want to switch them to employees, but you're probably fine. Where I get most concerned actually is if you hire somebody to help with your parents, right? Like we represent a lot of individuals who are being sued by a caregiver. It is happening more and more. And we often too have to work with the estate because that person passes and then they think like, oh, well, that person had millions, I can get some of it, and they get sued. So that happens a lot. So if you do have caregivers come in, there are specific plaintiffs firms that target representing caregivers, and they are ruthless. They know exactly what they're doing. So if you do have caregivers, I mean, please, please, please hire them properly. As an employee, have an employment agreement with them and run it through payroll. And then another question, if I hire a corporate entity, one person who operates as LLC or C Corp, am I a subcontractor? Am I basically safe? So you're a lot safer if you hire a corporate entity, right? Like it really should, it's best if you have one entity and another entity and you have an independent contractor agreement or a business services agreement between those two entities. What makes you the safest is if that hiring entity pays that one person, even if it's a single person that works for that LLC, if they have that person on payroll. If a corporation has an employee on payroll with full taxes and insurance, they can contract their employees to work with other businesses. Yeah, that's best. But I've also, believe it or not, and sometimes EDD is similar to like the DMV, where I know of one case where EDD was saying Galpin Ford is an employee. How can Ford, a dealership, be an employee? A corporate entity cannot be an employee. It's just impossible. It's a corporation, right? A corporation is not a human being. They can't be an employee. So yeah, we've seen a few things.
Cynthia, we're
yes.
going to have to wrap up now.
Yes, thank you so much.
Super fantastic. I think the rest of us can see that you've got deep game in these areas. Obviously, if any of you guys have additional needs for your businesses or anything of that nature, again, she and her team, great resource, super helpful. And thank you for what you brought today. I really appreciate having you here. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Cynthia.
So I am going to pivot now. We have as our next presenter, for those that don't know, Chiyoko, she's been around the FileMaker community for about forever. She's incredibly bright, very smart. A couple of years ago, I did a cribs, a little thing for Pause on Air. I did a little expose on a number of developers around the country and how they work and what tools they use and all those types of things. And I think we were super, I was just really impressed when talking with Chiyoko about not just her world and where she works and how it's so different than the rest of us, but she really kind of opened a door into how she plays deep in the XML space with some cockamamie tools and approaches that are really interesting and super time saving. So I think we're thrilled to have her. This is the first time she's presented for FMDiSC. So let's give her a nice warm welcome and let's turn her loose. Good to see you, Chiyoko.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. It's been such a pleasure to be involved with the FileMaker community, and I've never been able to go to an FMDiSC meeting till COVID. So yay, COVID for that. I am gonna show my screen here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about advanced XML migration with a tool I created with called Get Set FM. And it's a pet project of mine. I've been chipping away at it for about 4 or 5 years. So I will tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Chiyoko Yoshida, and I have my company is Chiyo FM. It's a one-woman shop. Since 1997, I worked part-time for a while. Eventually I went full-time after being an in-house developer, working at a visual merchandising company where we made everything you would ever see in a retail store, from mannequins to signage to graphics to sculptures to fixtures, anything you put your products on in stores we made. And my dad and I worked together, and he gave me a version of FileMaker 2.1, I think. So that's how far back I go. And then I moved on to a tech company where I learned about web development, web design. We did networking, hardware, software, and security services, as well as being an ISP. So that was a great experience. I went full-time senior FileMaker developer at Fiddlehead Software after meeting Kate Lee at a Pause on Air. And then eventually we merged together with Full City Consulting. And after that whole round, I went back to Chiyo FM full time. So that's my work life. And sorry, I don't have my viewer playing full screen. I should make this bigger. This is my first time presenting in using Keynote, so do bear with me here. So I've been around the community. They've just told you that, but I've been to DEF CON since 2007. I've had my demos shown at sessions with John Sindler and Johan Hedman. I've been to Pause on Air since 2010, and I did a small session on a sort of a panel discussion on how we work in 2013. And Dave told you he interviewed me for Cribs Developer Edition in 2018. I've been featured in some FileMaker marketing tech tips for some things I was doing back in the day, a sub-summary reporting technique and my FileMaker themes design palette. I also have done some themes for a free tool called Generator from Geist Interactive, and now they're Proof Geist, and a Flatman theme for Seed Code, and I'm a hoarder of links at Scoop It. Outside of that, I was originally from Chicago. I live with my boyfriend, our 4 dogs, 4 cats, the Green Sheet, Conyer, and Rivera. I make music, play guitar, drums, sing, and have released some records and recorded with other artists. And I love to make art. I'm very well known for making bunnies. So I'll get into the detail here. So what is Get Set FM? It's a work in progress developer tool created with FileMaker. It's not publicly available, and it parses the FileMaker clipboard XML into important details you need for code review and transformation. So on a warning about it, it is advanced. You do need to understand the underlying XML so you don't break it, because it uses find and replace of values. So you can blow things out. And this is why it's an advanced technique. You also need to be an advanced developer and understand your schema. So it's not for everyone. Why this is cool: with one click and one copy and one click, you get the code information without running DDRs or using traditional analysis tools. So this keeps you focused and in your workflow. You can check your work and spot inconsistencies quickly, transform your code, find and replace, or use one of the tools I've created. You can save development time and clicks, clean up your UI and make it consistent and pixel perfect, design better widgets, reuse your design patterns. And this is before we had add-ons. I've been working on this. I'm excited about add-ons as well. And it's also possible to save your code outside of FileMaker in a very distinct chunk, like a layout or a specific object, and review it in a basic text editor. If you choose to save versions, you can get diff information, and you can also restore it back as it once was. So that's pretty powerful. Why I made it. So I had a large project with a lot of similar UI components, and I needed to replicate complex features quickly and make them consistent. I wanted to use find and replace to make sweeping changes and updates. And I hated all the repeated clicking to implement, debug, and modify. And I just love tinkering with this. And under the hood, this isn't gonna be a technical session where I dive deep, like we're not gonna get into a text editor, but the components or the moving parts are Claire's FileMaker, Base Elements plugin, a wonderful free plugin that's created by Goya. FileMaker uses XML to, when you get the data from the clipboard, it's in the XML format. XPath is a syntax to identify and navigate nodes through the document. And this is what I'm using along with the base elements. There's a function to use XPath to navigate the XML document. So this is how I'm getting the data out. And working with a tool like this, it's good to have any text editor. I use BBEdit, and you can, I'm sure everyone has their preferred text editor, and there should be some kind of linter out there to help you format your XML. So with that, I'm going to jump into the demo items, and I'm just going to show you the features today so you can get an overall idea of what the capabilities are of playing around in this realm of the FileMaker XML clipboard. So I'm going to jump out of this presentation. Let me hide this and this and move a few things. All right, so let me get into FileMaker here. So this is Get Set FM. It always starts off with just a big button to get your clipboard. And over here, I have a demo. It's just a basic demo that I created. So it's not super beautiful, but the first thing I want to show you is how to transform a portal to work from the contacts area and place it into the companies area. So over here on the right, we have contacts, and under contacts, we can see related companies. And we want to take the related companies and flip that around. So from companies, we can see the contacts. I've already developed the solution. I'm not going to talk about the database, the data modeling or the schema or the scripting. Assuming you have all those pieces in place, you can do a quick transformation. If you don't have those pieces in place, you'll discover what you need to build. So let me just jump in here. I'm going to quickly just copy this portal into my clipboard, and I get my clipboard. I don't know if this is this, can people see this? I should turn up my chat if I can figure out how to do that.
Kind of tiny.
Yeah, your resolution is a little small.
Okay.
Kyoko, if you could bump that a little bit.
Yeah, let me just, should I go to my monitor settings here? Yeah. Sorry about that. Go to here.
Apple Plus to expand the screen.
How about this? No? How about this? Okay, well, I'm just gonna zoom in for you as needed. And so here we go. Is that a little better? Okay,
I don't know if it changed from where I'm sitting, but maybe you can zoom in when we get to code specific stuff.
I'm actually zoomed in, so I think I might be having a zooming.
Just try the Apple Plus and it'll get bigger.
Okay. Oh yeah, I'll do the basic one. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I always forget about that. Here we go. So I'll just scroll around the screen. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. So it won't look as pretty this way, but we'll just dive in. I just want to show you what you're looking at. So on the left side of the screen, by just copying the clipboard, I got information about this portal. A lot of things I wouldn't know if I didn't know anything about it. In this case, I do, but I can see I have 2 tables. We have 3 table occurrences, 4 fields. We can even dive down, you can see all these items: fields, layouts, value lists, variables, scripts, portals, button bars, placeholder text, parameters, hide conditions. I don't load all of it because it can be slow, So you can load any of these on demand from the clipboard. You can refresh them. And here we have object names, which is nice, text, plain text on the layout, and a tooltip. So this is also a very obfuscated item you can't normally see without some effort to understand this about this code. I'm going to pop down just so I can navigate to this panel and pop in here. So this is the transformation panel in the center of the screen. And the basic concept of the tool is that you get a list on the left of items you want to change, and you can set it over to the right, and you just basically you can either freeform type it, and there's ways to get this list, but it's basically a text editor for the clipboard. So you can make these sweeping changes, and it does value replace. It's case sensitive, so you have to understand what you're doing, and the sequence of things matters. So, and over on the right side of the screen are some tools, which I'll get to later. But for now, I'm transitioning this portal to the company's context. So there's a couple things in addition to these details I want to change, which I'm going to throw in here. I want to set in this text. This is the portal title, and I don't need the tooltip. And your values must match. So since I did that manually, I already know I'm going to change the title of the portal to contacts. Basically, how this works is you read down read down the list, and I poured in by default specific details that are most common to change. But if you find more detail in one of these sections, you can add it into the list and do your find and replace on it. So the first section, you can see these are fields. The second section, we have our table occurrences. The next item is my script. These are my objects names. So naming conventions matter. So the more familiar you are with your conventions, and if you have a convention, this is going to be a good tool for you. If you have a really you don't have a good convention, or you're using weird characters, you would want to be careful here. This is just this is the same table occurrences here, but it has no semicolons. This is my value list here. This is my placeholder text, which is also information we get. And this is the plain text I just added. So I want to show you how it's really easy to capture the fields, because if you type these in, there's a good chance you're going to mess that up. So let me pop over here into my demo. What I like to do, and I'll just pop into browse mode here, and you can just use the data viewer as a quick way to take advantage of the type ahead. And this is a way to know, do I have an inventory of these fields to transform this code? And it becomes almost a build list, which is really interesting. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to transition these relationships backwards from the other perspective. And this is where it's an advanced technique. If you don't understand relationships, this may not make sense to you, but it should, I hope you can follow along. I'm happy to do a deeper session where we can get more detailed into how and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But for this demo, I just want to show you a transformation. So these are the fields I want to use. So all I do is copy them out and pop them into here. Oh, and I lost my list. So let me jump that. I don't know how I must have clicked on a button. Here we go. So I'm going to replace those. So my fields are set, and you basically just read down this list and fix things, which is pretty easy once you get used to it. It does take a little time. I have a tool here where if you select anything, it'll pop it into the find field, and then this is what I'm going to replace with on the right. So I'm transitioning to companies, and instead of showing, I'm going to go line by line. So contacts is where I'm going. This is my join table, and this is fine. This is the company's table. You basically look what's on the left, and you have to just think, what what do I want to change that to? So you have to understand your code. And I plan on building a tool to help you like shoot this into your file and tell you, does this exist? You know, so you can know right away, you can spend less time here. This is just another table occurrence without semicolons, that's fine. This is my value list. So this is going to be contacts. This is my placeholder text. So I'm going to call that add contact. And this is my portal title. And we'll see how well I do here because this is easy to break. And there is one thing, sometimes as you use it, you'll realize certain things don't need to be changed. And this would take a little bit deeper dive, but once you get familiar with it, there's an order to things. So this, if you're doing the find and the replace, the order of things, sometimes you might wipe something out because it's done in this order, the top of the list down. So I'm taking it down just so I can show you the button panel. So I'm gonna do the button that's down here under context. And I'm just going to click that and pray I did that right. If not, I have a backup to show you how to do it because it's typing in a session. But voila, look, I transitioned the portal pretty well. Okay, so I'm going to place that. So it's looking pretty good thus far. I'm going to test it. What this does is it allows you to change every nook and cranny with that find and replace. And it does really cool things like this hide condition is now updated on this button. And I didn't have to hunt and peck for it. I just had to figure out what should that be. I almost don't need to understand too much about it. I just need to recognize the design, the common patterns we do in our coding and just match the path of the relationship. And there's also a layered field here, and underneath there's an ID, and here we see we got my placeholder text. So let me go into browse mode and just show you this portal. Voila, we have it, it's working. Oops, I didn't get my script right, so this is great. So, well, I'm not quite sure. Where's my script? Here it is. Yeah, I made a plural. This is the great thing is because you can just change it again, pop back in here and delete it and put it back in. Let's see if I fix that. I didn't mean to do this as long as I'm doing it. So I may be rushing through the rest of this, but here we go. So again, it takes a little time to get used to the process, but I've revealed, number one, I've learned about what is in this little snippet of code. It's right in front of me. I didn't have to run a DDR. If this were a more complicated portal with more buttons with conditional formatting, when you do this replace sequence, it catches all of that. And what I find is that I have less bugs. Once I've created a good widget and I solidly, have replaced all the elements, I have really, I have to debug less. I create code that's more, I can reproduce better across modules, and then things become more consistent and my naming conventions become better over time. And it just overall makes things better, and you keep learning about it because you keep encountering issues. So with that, let me just jump into the next demos that I have here. So in the tool, I have some little tools or sub tools. I guess it's a tool within a tool. Here I have a spacing tool. So to position your fields, you should be having not field, you don't want your fields to look like this. So I've created a quick way to just copy the fields that you want to fix, and you just bring them into the clipboard. And in this case, we're not going to do a transition. So we can just go into some spacing options here. I'm going to choose to distribute the heights exactly 4 points. And I will just delete those and paste them back in. So for anyone who's ever done your user interface, this is a really time-consuming process to keep things lined up to a particular point size. And if you know what it takes to do it as a user interface person, you'll know you have to check the bottom of this one and make sure this one's like 4 pixels, exactly 4 pixels below it, you know. So this is a huge time saver, and it really helps you to spiff up your interface. In addition to this, I won't go through all of there's a few other options on that. You can go horizontal, you can resize to the first field and distribute. And a tip on this is if you want things flush, you can also use a negative point size. If you want -1 will make field edge to edge in either direction. The other cool thing is this text. So I'm going to clean this up because it just came in like how FileMaker always does it. It just brings in the text, and when you drag it in, it's never styled. So I'm going to revert the style there, but I'm just going to cut this out, and I want to grab it into my clipboard, and you can see it's in here if you want to look at it, but I'm just using the tool. And oh, well, let me make sure it's in here. I want to just make sure it's there. So I want to format this text to proper, and I'm going to do this. So this is a time saver. The other cool thing about this, when you use this tool on text, it will respect the boundary of this text object. So if you use merge variables or you know, fields where it gets really long, if you do this replace, your field boundary won't like slip up and turn like this, which is a common thing. It happens like a million times when you're working in this space, and you have to constantly be resizing your field labels, or if you're using text to display merge variables and functions. So that's a really valuable tool for me. And so that, I believe, covers spacing. Let me hop in and move through this. So another thing we get is we're always copying things to reproduce them all over. I hope we're not doing them from scratch. And along with that, we get things like placeholder text. So if I wanted to repurpose this fields stack because I like the way it looks and put it into a different context, I might end up with some weird placeholder text. And to fix that, you know, you have to click into each field, find the inspector area, and change your text there. So here's a tool that alleviates that pain. I'm just gonna copy this to show you. It's get clipboard, and we will remove the placeholder text. And great, let's see if it worked. And we'll go into browse mode here. And you see here, we now have these fields without any placeholder text. So that kind of helps a lot when you're moving little widgets all over the place. You don't get and it doesn't take as much time to clean it up. I'm going to go into resize the button bars. So in this case, we have 2 button bars here we're using as a menu. We have navigation and actions, and you can see they're not properly spaced. So a common issue with working with your interface design is that you will have, you know, buttons that are inconsistently sized, and you should, in my opinion, you should have the same size buttons. So here there's a tool to go in, and normally what I would do is think, I want this to be 32 points high, and I have 5 segments, and then I would calculate what the height of this button bar should be. So what this tool, as you can guess, will, I'm just going to copy it. You're getting the gist of it now. So I'm going to go into sizing and adjust my button bar size. And I have a question here. I could probably automate that, but I'm going to say 32 points. And just to show you, I'll throw it elsewhere on the layout. So here, I think that might be already 32, but let's do this one. And we'll get the clipboard, and we'll adjust the button bar sizing vertically, 32 points. And here we go. So now these are consistently sized. And this is a pattern we repeat all the time when we're designing and doing production on our solutions. We're constantly resizing these button bars, and God forbid you need to remove one, then you got to recalculate the whole thing. So all of these are just little details that take up time, are kind of frustrating, and they free up time to do more of the real hard development work. I'm going to jump into this one. So another painful point, and these are all just little things, but they do add up. As you know, your icons, if you ever want to change your icon, you have to go into each segment or each individual button, invoke the button bar setup, either type into the size that you would like your icon to be, or use your slider. This is challenging on a button bar. At least they all go up at the same time. So to save us some headaches and make our interface a lot better, you can go in here and get the clipboard, and we are going to change the icon sizes. And in this case, I think I'll just go down to 12. Let's just see. And I've been using this tool for about 4 or 5 years, and at first it seemed too crazy Wild West to be doing this kind of stuff. Oh, and look, it didn't work. Well, I guess I somehow screwed that one up. Let's see, did I do it right? Maybe I didn't get my clipboard. Let's see. Icon size. Here we go. Oh, I know I did that. Oh no, not 243. Okay. Well, this might be my demo fail. We'll see. Yeah, this one's not working today. It normally does. Let me try these just alone. Give it one more try. Give it the click. And we will change the icon sizes back down to 12. I knew something had to go crazy wrong. Here we go. Let's get rid of this. And I think it might have been that slider thing there. That worked. I don't know why it was a little bit different. So obviously I have a little bit of, I think the slider change somehow did it, because that's the only thing I've done different on the button bar. But nonetheless, more consistency in your interface, less time trying to propagate all of the various details. Moving into, so this is another one. These are all this minutia, but so these button bars, as you know, FileMaker by default has all of the cursor hand over buttons turned off by default. I personally like a hand icon to let my users know that they are about to click on something. It's universal. So I'm constantly clicking these on and off. And I've probably lost, I bet, at least a month of my life on clicking these. So I'm going to copy this one and pop into here, get the clipboard, and we will, in this case, what am I going to do? Show, and I'm going to make a distinction. This is a button bar. I'm going to show my hand icons. So let's pop into here. And now we have icons with a lot less pain, and it works the reverse. So you can, I'll just show you, might as well see if it works. So I'm gonna get the clipboard and I'm gonna hide all of the hover icons at once. So here we go, let's see if it worked. Save this. So here, voila, now we have no icons, we have hands, no hands, hands, no hands. So that's the, and these are all just little things, and I keep coming up with new ideas, but even tons of ideas. But here we have, remove all the hide conditions. So this is a real gotcha, because again, we're often copying and pasting things and repurposing, and you might miss a hide condition, and then suddenly you've got a button missing on your screen and your customers calling you saying there's a bug, and maybe it's just that you didn't realize you missed a hide condition when you copied something over. So this these two button segments, number 3 and 4, are set up to hide and find mode, as well as the menu button. And to change these, you have to click into each one, or even to understand that they exist is challenging. So I'm going to do what I've been doing. I'm just going to copy these 2 items, and actually I'll just cut them out. Why not? And I will get the clipboard, and just for fun, it's showing hide conditions. So it's not pretty. I got to work on these, but it found the hide conditions. This is the stuff I got to clean up in here, but you could review it just to even understand what's going on with the hide conditions is kind of interesting in and of itself, even without removing them. But we can just remove the hide conditions because we're copying these and we want to put them into a new context or situation, but we like the way they look and the way they're formatted. So again, now you see we no longer have the hide condition icon on button 3 and 4, and the menu button looks good. I guess I didn't show you in find mode, but those buttons would have hidden prior to this. So now they are showing, which is great. And nobody's complaining about a button that's suddenly missing. So that kind of is a wrap on my demos. And I just want to give you a feeling for the capabilities of what you can do just by copying and pasting and getting information from your clipboard from FileMaker. And this is kind of a tool that sits in between all the other tools like FM Perception, Inspector Pro, Base Elements. They're all amazing tools and I use them all. But this fits right into your workflow. You just look at the thing you're working on and you get the information about it. It's also transportable. You can use it with anything you can copy. So scripting, I've copied entire scripts and transitioned them to a new context. You can work within tables and fields. So it's super powerful, but it is dangerous. Because it is changing the underlying XML, and it's important to not break that. So it would be a use at your own risk type of thing if you ever did use this tool. Moving along here. So that's the end of my demo. I think I'll go back to my keynote and jump into a slide. Let's just go where I should have gone in the first place, is this nice big screen. So here we go. I covered those demo items. To wrap up, some find and replace gotchas. I think I've said it a bunch of times, but the sequence of values matter. It is value replace. So if you put something in the wrong order, you might wipe it out later in your in the series of replaces that happen, and vice versa. There could be something at the end that breaks something that you've changed earlier. So once you start to get a feel for that, and if you have good conventions, I found it to work really well. So that's just something you need to be conscious of. And my final thoughts, creating Get Set FM helped me explore and learn more about FileMaker and what's possible with gaining access to the clipboard. It allows me to enjoy all the benefits of native development environment, but it takes me to another level, which I've always wanted to go, which is be able to get in there with my hands and text and just do sweeping changes safely. And the immediate availability of the details has helped me to understand code I'm working on faster, and I'm much more confident and more comfortable diving into applications I'm less familiar with. If you're doing support, you can focus on something and just not be fearful and overwhelmed by what might be going on under the hood. And I'm able to create consistent widgets and more reusable design patterns. I created this before we had add-ons, and I think it's a little different. I think there's still a place for this. This is more of a production tool, I feel like. Code across a lot of screens and a lot of context. And it's improvement. Yeah?
Oh, sorry, you were breaking up just a bit. I just wanted to make sure your audio was still okay.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I don't know where I left off, but I'll just keep going. So creating and maintaining consistency in my application UI is much easier, and I can kill the detritus that comes with copy and paste. I save a ton of time clicking and foraging for details that are often obfuscated. And it's not, again, the right tool for every situation. 4 or 5 years, I'm still coming up with ideas. I barely dipped a toe into the possibilities, and I continue to learn new things as I work with this tool over time. And I'm excited to keep working on it. And I'm interested in possibly releasing it as a free tool or maybe a paid tool once it's solid. If anyone was interested, I'm interested to know. Links, these are just a few links. Most people are probably familiar, but they're here on the slide later if you want to research more about what's going on under the hood. And these are just little apps I use a lot. That's basically just in case we need something to talk about. You can follow me online at these places. At my website, I have feeds again on FileMaker. On Scoop It, I have developer resources where I have everything from Angular to Vue.js to CSS, you know, tools and information about studying those topics. And I also have a feed on UI, UX, and design, which is great. I refer to it myself quite a bit. I hoard things and I just save and share them. And of course, you can find me personally on Twitter at Cheeto. So with that, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the soup. And I will, I guess, I didn't.
Chiyoko, I wanted to run you by, we've got a whole slew of questions, and we probably have about 8 or 10 minutes that we can kind of work our way through these. I'll read some off to you, but one quick question I have, you know, hey, we can break things by using this incorrectly. What's the best way to know that you've broken something? Is it just the object stops working, or does FileMaker throw up an error, or do you get a file corruption issue, and how do you back out if you do get a problem? How do you back out of that?
Yeah, so I thought it would be really scary. I thought I'd have corruption, but I've been doing this for 4 or 5 years and I've never experienced any oddities with the files that I've used this on. What I find to be the symptom of a problem is that you simply copy and paste, say in the case of a portal, you just won't see your field name, your portal will be unnamed, your script will be undefined. So it's not a terrible break in my experience. I can't say I know every realm that it could break because I don't know how people could possibly try to run replace code, but it's very distinct chunks of code it tries to replace. And so far it's been pretty consistent.
We have a question by Beverly. She's asking, when you're calling a script, does the new script need to be created first? It
does. And that's the next piece for me to build. I've actually kind of experimented with that, but all it will be is undefined. If you paste it into the layout and you're like, oh, the button doesn't work, the script will say undefined or unknown. And you just go in and either pick it if you know what it is, or if you have a slew of them, or you know that you need to create it. So it kind of becomes, oh, what do I need to build to make this thing work from this different context? And that's kind of where I want to go with it, is that you can plug in your replace values and say to the solution you're working on, does this field exist? Yes or no, and give you a list of fields, tables, and scripts that don't exist. And at that point, you would be able to go in and say, oh, I need to build them, or it's a different name. I need to correct it in my replace sequence.
Got it. There's another question here by Stephen. Can you reset the tab order using your tool and approach?
I would assume I could. I'm sure it's in the XML. So I haven't tried it yet, but it's all in there. Usually I haven't tried it, but I'd like to see if I could get it to work. And that's the stuff I'm really interested in.
That's a gotcha, the tab order.
Yeah.
Last I checked, and it might have been updated, but there were 2 holes, at least 2 holes in the XML. One was tab order, one was import order. So it's a wee bit of a gotcha unless it got updated somewhere along the line.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I just assumed it was in there. I hadn't looked for it yet.
Bob
maybe it is.
Jockey, I'm sorry. Bob Jockey asks, is this tool capable of working with object styles? It would be great to be able to observe multiple object attributes and change them to increase consistency.
I want to explore that. I haven't done it yet, but I've been thinking about it a lot in the past couple of weeks. I'm like, I got to dive into the XML. You do see let me see if I have BB Edit here. Let me get this up. I do have a little code in here, and here I can show you the, I'm going to tidy this. This is the linter, and I'll show you really quickly that it is very good to have, to just, the easiest thing when you dive into the XML is just collapse it all. just close it and then start to investigate each node. But if you look at one object here, you'll see that there's a style area, and there's the full CSS, and then there's the theme and the theme ID. And I'm hoping that at least you might be able to change the style, paste it in, and then save it as a new style, or change. I haven't tried it yet, but I really want to dive into this. And I feel like there's got to be some capabilities here to dive into this. I'm assuming if you could identify the theme, if you have two themes, you might be able to just change the theme. So I'm excited to try it.
It's a little weird the way they put it together, because they've got a list of all of the style names, and each one of them has an ID. And then they've got a whole other section where the IDs exist and actually call out the styles, but they don't mention the names. So you've got to flip back and forth between them, and they're not even in the same order as they are in the list. So
right,
I've been looking at it too recently. Yeah. So
I would think that it might be possible to create a localized style or something and then save it. You know, we may not, I have looked at the theme stuff under the custom theme stuff under the hood, so I kind of understand what you're talking about.
There's, with respect to versions and compatibility, Chiyoko, there's a question of both, Mac and Windows compatibility, and then versions of FileMaker in terms of compatibility. And even in that vein, is there a benefit if I'm working in FileMaker 19, but I want to keep your tool working in 18 so I can toggle between them? Or any thought with respect to the compatibility of platform and versioning?
Okay, so like platform, I haven't tried it on Windows yet. So that's an unknown. I'm happy to explore it if I decide to put this out and share it with the world. I would definitely look at that. Also, in terms of compatibility of FileMaker versions, I've been using the same tool, like I said, about 4 or 5 years. And I haven't had to change any of my routines where I'm updating things. And I just recently started using XPath. There was a point at which I was parsing everything and changing everything using like position, and it was really cumbersome, but that's what I knew how to do. And now I'm starting to learn XPath. But I can tell you from my experience, I've been using, obviously in the last versions from FileMaker for the past 4 or 5 years, I haven't had it break. I would have to stress test it and go backwards. I would, if I released it, I would stress test it against at least a few versions backwards.
We're gonna bust out into break rooms in just a second, but I want to ask you one other quick question. Is this an environment you feel comfortable with? I mean, is this something that you work in only offline versions of systems, or you're pretty comfortable doing this in a live production environment as well?
I don't often do it in a live production. I've mostly used this for creating new solutions, and then they get hosted. I'm feeling pretty confident about the simple features, like the removing of hide conditions and placeholder text, because that's a very distinct, the way it's hunting for it and pecking for it, that stuff seems to be working pretty well. I mean, it's been remarkably consistent. That's all I can say. It's really a pet project. So often use it on production systems. I will use it on production systems for analysis. For sure, I've used it in that case where I'm like looking at something I don't know. I don't know anything about what's on the screen and somebody's asking me to fix it. I will just copy the stuff I'm working with on the screen or in the script area, and it really narrows me in so I can be like, okay, I gotta look at these TOs and get the gist of things. So for analysis, for sure. Live production, I'd have to test it, I suppose, is my same answer.
Be a little cautious, right? Yeah.
I'm always cautious. That's why I haven't released this or shared it as for free or anything, because I realize the potential dangers.
There's a, one thing I'll just tell you before we cut into our breakout rooms. Number one, fantastic presentation, super informative, really well thought out in terms of how this can really help save developers a lot of time. Obviously, you have a few question marks in areas that you're still polishing out. We're a great group. If you ever decide to do a little beta program or want to get some testers, don't feel like you can't reach out to our group. There might be some people here that could help you kind of figure out how to polish this up and get some of those other questions answered. Thank you very much, Chiyoko. I think that was just fantastic. You did a great job. This was her first time presenting. So I think from that standpoint, she did just a fantastic job. We're going to break out into our breakout rooms and take about a 10-minute break. I'm hoping we see Mr. Andrew LeCate sign on in the meantime, and I hope to have you guys back in just a bit. So thanks, Chiyoko. Great job.
Thank you so
hope
much.
you stay with us.
Thank you.
Great having you.
All right.